Hello and welcome to the weekly vmcampos comic book club. I'm your host, vmcampos. This is the series where I review a comic book, new or old, from my collection, and rate it on the factors of the cover art, interior art, plot, and enjoyability of the book on a scale of 1 to 5. And then I tell you to get it or shred it. This week I'm reading Robotech Remix, Volume 2, Number 1, published by Titan Comics in 2019. For the free video version of the podcast, head on over to patreon.com/vmcampos. A little background info as usual. Robotech, wow, this takes me back. I grew up in the 80s and the 90s, and I remember one of my vague memories growing up way back in the early to mid 80s was Robotech, this amazing cartoon that was, in retrospect, way more mature, way more complex than any cartoons that I was watching at the time. I haven't seen any of the series since I first watched it 30 or 35 years ago, so it's mostly in my memories how amazing it was, but I think it still stands the test of time. I really want to go back and watch those original series. I can't really tell you much of the plot and the characters. I remember the name Rick Hunter and the SDF-1. That was the big mecha that everyone was in. And vaguely the plot is something like, in the far-flung future of the year 1996, an alien craft lands on Earth, it destroys an island, and then humanity spends the next 20 years or 30 years or something rebuilding the ship and discovering, yeah, there's life out there, and there's perhaps hostile aliens and such, so we gotta get ready. That's what Robotech is about. Now, on a deeper level, the original American Robotech series, it was actually a combination of 3 Japanese anime series put together by Harmony Gold and apparently Carl Machek. He took those 3 series and put it together into one 85-episode epic that aired in American television in the 80s. And I remember the first, 1/3 of it, somewhat, and the next ones I don't really remember. There was something about the future and the descendants of people and all of this stuff, so I have history with Robotech. It was a formative cartoon back in the 80s in my youth, and it's a global phenomenon still around. And so Titan Books is publishing their Volume 2 of Robotech Remix, which came out a few years ago. I didn't get a chance to read that one, so I'm kind of jumping in blind here. But there's a little bit of synopsis at the beginning. So let's get started in the review. First of all, the cover art. I went with Cover C by Rico Renzi. I loved his work on the Spider-Gwen series when he was on it, and this cover mixes one of these classic characters. It feels like in the classic 80s style. Rico was able to recreate that style pretty well, the character Dana. I didn't remember her name until I read the book, but yeah, that's Dana. And we've got the classic Veritech fighters zooming by, and it feels very 80s, very luminous, very modern, very cyberpunk style. This cover, it's got halftones and honeycomb patterns and luminous purple and green colors. I think it's a very striking background. It's retro futuristic. Is it vaporwave style? I like the cover a lot. I give it a 5 out of 5. It's nostalgic plus modern. I like the contrast with the classic Robotech logo, these very stylized block letters with the remix part of the logo, which is like in a scratchy marker style. And we've got a little bit of Japanese on the top left, remix. So Robotech Remix. Very nice cover. Interior art is by Elmer Damaso, colors with Marco Lesko, lettering Jim Campbell. I enjoyed the interior art a lot. It is like an American style, anime style or manga style. It is very close to what I would count as classic manga or anime style. The characters are in that vein. We have speed lines, we have sparkly eyes, big eyes, purple hair, faces, and the like. So it does feel like it feels Japanese. It feels like a manga with American styles in them. In the colorization, there's gradients, cell shading mixed together. Now, I said American style of manga, but actually Titan Books is from the UK, so I'm not sure if this is a UK creative team. Didn't have that info actually. But anyway, I really like this interior art. I'll also give it a 5 out of 5. The panel layout is excellent, very dynamic in some places, especially when the action starts. As I said, it's got the classic manga speed lines, expressions are good, anatomy is great. As I said, I have Robotech more in my memories than I've actually seen it recently. So I was pretty lost in what the series was about. There's a little recap at the beginning I'll get to, but I was lost with who's this character, and apparently this is a time-shifted character, and this is an older character, and this is an alternate character, and I was lost in that stuff, but we'll get to that in the plot. But I think it still came together because the artwork is just so good. It really drives the story, the various locations that we're at, the various characters and their expressions, the action shots are excellent. It was very enjoyable. The high-tech stuff is really good when they add in the scan lines to video feeds and such. That works great. We seem to have a contrast between the main characters, that they are cel-shaded, where the backgrounds are often a little bit more with gradients and other colors to contrast them. There's a spot where there are some background characters. We focus on foreground characters, and these background characters are there. They're sort of faded out in an interesting way that makes them look nice. There's a memory, and it's like out of focus. I think visually the book works great. There's an anomaly happening on the moon where we see the SDF-3. When I read that, I'm like, whoa, the SDF-3. And so that space shot looks great in cool blue tones compared to the anomaly happening on the moon. So interior art, 5 out of 5. Let's talk about the plot. First of all, the script is by Brendan Fletcher. And there's an introduction. In the mid-80s, producer Carl Machek was recruited by Harmony Gold to create Robotech for the US market. Carl deftly edited 3 Japanese anime series and tied them together into an epic 85-episode saga, told across 3 chapters, the Macross Saga, the Masters, and the New Generation. The stories continued in Robotech 2, the Sentinels, and the Shadow Chronicles. In 2017, Titan Comics' Robotech series began. The Macross Saga was retold, but certain plot elements changed. Now, spoiler alert if you didn't read the original one, like I didn't. Captain Global died, Rick Hunter went blind, and an adult time-displaced Dana Sterling was eventually introduced, way before she was supposed to appear. And now the saga continues. Welcome to Robotech Remix. So even reading that, I was completely out of my depth about what is this story about. It's Robotech Remix. I saw the cover, I saw the title, and I thought, I'll get it. And reading the introduction here, this is a volume 2, because it also states in the indicia, Robotech Remix number 2-1. So I think this is volume 2 of a new series. Even though I don't remember originally seeing Robotech Remix, it was originally called Robotech, simply Robotech, but that was remixing things that happened in the original timeline. And then Dana Sterling and Time Displaced and all of that. So again, it's very confusing if you haven't read the book, the previous books. And they try to do a good job of kind of explaining enough if you didn't read the original. Dana Sterling is our main character. She's from a different timeline or dimension or whatever, and she's in this current timeline, which has a lot of things changed. And as I said before, as I read it, I feel like, okay, this is vaguely familiar, but this is a change upon it. So Captain Global was the original captain of the SDF-1, and here we have Lisa in charge instead, and she looks really cool in Global's original outfit. Then there's like shout-outs to, for example, Domilan Exodore. I think that was an original character from the original Robotech, but was a villainous character. Now he's here as part of the good guys on Earth. So there's just a lot to be confused about, plus the remix that's happening. But still, I'm going to give this a 4.5 out of 5. I enjoyed the plot, even separating it from what happened in the previous comics and the TV shows. You get a good sense of these characters, of their motivations, of their personalities. There's a lot of world building that works well, not too intrusive, and then of course action and a great cliffhanger at the end. And so I want to pick up the next issues. So I got this off the comic shelf. last week, and I didn't quite know that it was already kind of old. Apparently it came out back in October 2019 in the good old days. So I've got to go catch up. It's probably out in a trade paperback already, but I'm more of a single issue reader myself. So I'll go back to the shops and see if the other issues are here. I don't know how many are in the series, probably 5 or so issues. So very digestible. And moving on to the enjoyability of the book, I'll also give it a 4.5 out of 5. I thought the art was great, the writing was great. It helped get me up to speed enough, assuming I had never seen anything about this property at all. It got me up to speed enough about it. I still feel kind of lost in it, but the book was very enjoyable again. Art-wise, it's got this mixture of American plus Japanese styles, or I guess UK and Japanese style. It's got a compelling plot and characters with their own motivations and everything. And I was having vague flashbacks of the original series that I watched way back in the 80s, and it was good flashbacks. So, should you get it or shred it? Definitely get it. Check out Robotech Remix Volume 2, Number 1, and maybe even go back to the first Robotech Remix, which wasn't called Robotech Remix. It was just called Robotech, and it was from 2017, Titan Comics. And even if you don't go back to the original Robotech Remix Volume 1, I still recommend Remix Volume 2. And so that was my review. What did you think? Would you be interested in reading the comic? Have you read the comic before, or any other Robotech comics? What about any from the 80s? Did you read any of the 80s vintage comics? I think I only had one from the original Macross series, and then a couple from like the Masters. But this is definitely a series that's in the dark recesses of my mind from the 80s. In my early formative years. I had the toys as well, some of the toys. And I remember playing the video game on the GameCube or the Wii or whatever it was. It was probably the GameCube, and I thought it was pretty enjoyable. This is a property that's been around for a long time, whether you saw it originally in Japanese or English. We still have comic books all about it, and I think that's a good thing. So once again, if you'd like to see the video version of the podcast, head on over to patreon.com/vmcampos. You can follow for free and be alerted to everything that I do about comic books, San Diego Comic-Con, cosplay, my live weekly show about comics, Magic the Gathering, technology, snacks, etc., all for free at the Patreon. If you'd like to pledge and support, I've got a $1 tier where you unlock exclusive stuff. At the $2 tier, I'll mail you some comic books in appreciation. But if you can't support at the moment, no worries, simply follow for free to be alerted to everything that I do. Don't forget to check out my weekly Saturday live show where we talk about comic books that are coming out in the following week. Follow to know when that happens. I hope to see you there live. So this week I read Robotech Remix Volume 2, Number 1, published by Titan Comics in 2019. This has been the weekly VM Campos Comic Book Club, and I'll see you next week.